Who are the youth? They're referred to by a host of different phrases. The leaders of today, the leaders of tomorrow, an asset of a country, a rebellious community, immature boys and girls, and more. As a young person, at least by the Sri Lankan age definition, I can tell you that the youth are so much more than the labels that are placed upon us. We are an undermined and underempowered community. Why I say that the youth are undermined and underempowered is because of the unsustainable approaches to youth development that are adopted across the world. Let's first talk about who we identify as being young and not young. Youth, according to the social sciences, is a stage between childhood and adulthood. The globally accepted definition for youth is the age-based categorization that has been put forward by the United Nations, which states that the youth are all human beings between the ages of 15 years and 24 years. If we go by this definition, in 2019, 16% of the global youth population were composed of young people. We're talking about 1.2 billion people. The number just keeps rising. According to the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, in 2065, the youth population will peak at 1.4 billion people. The interesting thing about this population growth is that in the next 3 decades, the youth population in 47 of the least developed countries will increase by 62%. These statistics show us that we're bracketing in a considerable portion of the global population and implementing single policies on all of them. The national definition of youth actually varies from country to country. For example, in Sri Lanka, the definition for youth are all persons between the ages of 15 years and 29 years. But in South Africa, the National Youth Commission Act defines youth as all persons between the ages of 14 years and 35 years. This shows us that we are lumping in a wide age range into one cohort and implementing uniform policies for children in their secondary education and even young parents with children. The second collective error that we're making is giving predominant focus to the bottom-to-top approach for youth development. The bottom-to-top approach in social development is an approach by which we increase community-level participation in all stages of a developmental program, ranging from formulation to implementation. Without a doubt, this approach is very important to increase community participation in development and to ensure that appropriate assistance is given to those in need. But the bottom-to-top approach for youth development is not enough to result in inclusive and sustainable youth empowerment. This is because of 2 reasons. The first reason is that solely focusing on the bottom-to-top approach for youth development actually neglects top-level youth empowerment processes. Top-level youth empowerment processes are apex systematic decisions that are traditionally taken by the government, such as youth policy formulation and youth infrastructure development. The problem is that in most cases, top-level youth empowerment processes are conducted without the direct consultation of young people who are affected by these administrative decisions. Voluntary social service organizations and youth advocates are encouraged to focus on community-level mobilization, which diverts their attention from top-level youth empowerment processes. The second reason as to why the bottom-to-top approach isn't enough is because of the existing bureaucracy and red tape in governmental organizations overseeing national youth development. This prevents the impact of the work done by passionate volunteers and young leaders in the grassroots level trickling upwards to actually reach the top level or the apex level and thereby result in youth-friendly decision making within the administrative structure. Another result of this is actually a disjoint between the government and community level organizations. Let me share an example. In 2019, before establishing Hype Sri Lanka as the first youth empowerment incubator, I interviewed a few of my fellow young leaders who were heading youth organizations in the country. And 65% of these interviewees actually admitted to having not registered their organizations with the NGO Secretariat of Sri Lanka. There were several reasons that they cited for this lack of registration. Firstly, they said that the process was very cumbersome, and some others said that they did not have enough knowledge about the registration process. And another reason that was cited is the fact that it was logistically difficult to get the necessary assistance to register their organization. Another problem or another problematic approach that is taken by the world in terms of youth development is the fact that we don't facilitate sustainable partnerships amongst the stakeholders of the youth developmental system. There are so many youth organizations that are actually working very hard on different causes, but they work in isolation, either because they don't have access to networking opportunities or because they simply want to be the best youth organization in their area, in their region, or their countries. This actually results in a duplication of programs, a division of scarce financial resources, and even adoption of trendy advocacy practices. We have extensively spoken about what is wrong with our current approaches to youth development. How do we reform these unsustainable practices? That is where Youth Empowerment Incubation, YEI, comes in handy. YEI is actually an ideology that streamlines the youth developmental system and changes its dependency on the bottom to top approach for youth development. It encourages parallel participation of the youth in community level mobilization and even top level youth empowerment processes. It does this through two main avenues. The first avenue is by increasing youth participation in top level youth empowerment processes. The second way is actually fostering sustainable partnerships amongst the various stakeholders of the youth developmental system. The YEI ideology is mainstreamed through youth empowerment incubators. The first of its kind, Hype Sri Lanka, was established and tested in the pearl-shaped island of the Indian Ocean. Let me share two projects that we do at Hype Sri Lanka. The first project is what we call the Hype Policy Tank. This is a completely volunteer-run, independent think tank which seeks to facilitate the youth policy formulation cycle of the country. It does this by outputting research, by organizing stakeholder discussions, and by producing policy notes under the leadership of a group of dedicated volunteers who are called independent policy thinkers. This makes the Hype Policy Tank truly innovative because it is the only volunteer-run independent think tank in Sri Lanka which focuses on supporting the youth policy formulation process. The second project is Project Nexus. Project Nexus is a cluster-based networking opportunity for the stakeholders of the youth developmental system of Sri Lanka. Youth organizations are invited to register with Hype Sri Lanka by filling in a trilingual registration form. Once they're registered, they're clustered into one of 24 different clusters based on the work that they carry out. Then the Project Nexus team will organize intra-cluster and inter-cluster networking sessions for these youth organizations. Intra-cluster networking refers to networking within a particular cluster, whilst intercluster networking refers to networking amongst the clusters. Youth empowerment incubation as an ideology encourages youth participation in the macro picture, in the bigger picture of youth development. That is because youth development, which is sustainable and inclusive, cannot take place in unsustainable systems.